Welcome to another Song of Ice and Fire video from Westeros.org. This time we will be discussing, or well, attempting to discuss time in A Song of Ice and Fire. And by that we don't mean time, how the maesters keep time, or, anything about the irregularity of the seasons, or, time scales of the series, because there's a lot of questions to be asked about that as well when you go further into the past. But we are looking at the idea of time and how does the past, present, and future connect up together in Westeros? Can you change the past? Can you see the future? Is the future set in stone? And various aspects of that. And it will probably be a bit it's going to be very speculative, and we're not philosophers or anything like that.
Cosmologists or physicists. Yeah. This is very amateur. This is just some thoughts based on what's in the books and what...
From a world-building angle, I should say, in a sense that it's what do we think that George imagines about how these aspects of time work in his setting, because that is a part of what you imagine when you do an imaginary setting. How much do we think he has thought this through? What sort of ideas do we think he has about that? Looking at other things he has written, other things within the genre of fantasy and science fiction, and just trying to speculate a bit on what various hints and clues in the novels might mean.
So what is the evidence for the nature of time? I mean, the main thing we have, and we have it pretty much from the get-go in the series, is prophecy. The idea that people have seen or have written down things they have seen about the future. It runs throughout the series. We're introduced to the prophecy of Azor Ahai in A Clash of Kings, with Melisandre saying, when the Red Star bleeds, and the place of smoke and salt and so on. We have...
And there's lots of ways that people can see the future, apparently, because, obviously we have long-term prophecies, as you say, the Azor Ahai prophecy. We don't know where it originated and how it was perceived in the first place. You have Melisandre and Thoros seeing things in the flames. You have Jojen and his green dreams. You have
Bran as well having
dreams. You have dragon dreams, which somehow appear to fall within the Targaryen lineage and concern the future of those connected to dragons.
Yeah, Dana the Dreamer and more recently Daeron the Drunken were both people who had prophetic visions. Also Daemon II, Blackfire as well.
You have the Dosh Khaleen claiming to prophesize for the birth of a child. You have the potential that what Mary Mazdur speaks is in fact a prophecy.
Maybe.
Well, it used to be that people discounted it quite a bit, and now it seems elements of it.
That's a difficult one, but on the other hand, we have Maggie the Frog. On the other hand, so we have lots of prophecies, and one of the big questions is: are all prophecies true? Now, Melisandre is the interesting one because she is the person who, out of some strange delusion, is often saying, "Oh well,
this could be a prophecy or a warning."
This could be a prophecy or a warning. A warning may be representing things that may be. So, for example, she told Stannis that seeing Renly coming out of the south with an army to smash him at King's Landing was a possibility that he could avert if he killed Renly. And then it turns out this is not actually the case. Now, what she indicates is, oh, well, I thought it was a warning of what may happen, and in fact, it was a vision of what would happen. It is really fascinating.
Now, it's understandable, because if she had seen the possibility, or as she saw it, then the possibility, but which seems to be the truth of it, that Renly could be killed, it's very possible that she saw the circumstances of herself and Stannis killing Renly via shadow magic. And okay, for killing Renly, then surely the second element of the prophecy can't be real. So, but she has some reason for believing that there are, prophecies and that there are warnings, whereas somebody like Jojen says that he's convinced that green dreams always come true.
Yeah.
I mean, he hasn't died yet, so he can't say for certain that it always comes
Yeah.
true. But
I think the best example of a warning that she gets that I think maybe gives an explanation is where she sees Davos plotting to kill her, and so that was clearly a warning, and it's quite clear. I mean, Davos figures out she's able to see warnings to her, threats to her own person. But did she see him standing over her body with a knife? Is that what the vision showed? Did she realize, he's going to try and kill me? Or did she see him plotting with Salah, brandishing a knife and saying, he's going to plan to kill me, I'll stop him? Yeah. That it's almost rare she had almost of a kind of a surveillance system or a danger sense if you're a Spider-Man fan.
But there's also one prophecy or vision that she has that gives an insight into how she views this. It's the one where she sees the towers by the sea submerged by this black wave, and she tells John that he guesses Eastwatch, and she isn't certain about it at all. But that's seems to fit, and if you act, you can do something about it. And then she thinks to herself, what else is the meaning of visions?
What else is what would be the purpose of them if it wasn't to allow us to do things about them? So she has, where this is her religion, her education, teaching her.
Like, why would the Lord send us visions if we couldn't do anything about them?
Yeah. So she's very odd, but everyone else is pretty clear. I mean, the Dosh Khaleen is an interesting one because, I mean, what makes these crones, these women who were formerly Khaleesi's, suddenly able to actually have prophetic ability? I'm careful. I'm worried about one. I do think that there's a stallion around the world. It happens to be Dany or her dragons, and that they didn't understand it right. But for the most part, people who we know use magic, people who we know actually are seeing things in those fires or dreaming things, those always come true. The only confusion point is Melisandre saying, well, sometimes I'm being warned about something that's going on that's a danger, and sometimes I'm being told about what will happen. I don't always know which is which. But
well, also with the Dosh Khaleen, I mean, we have examples of people who apparently were able to learn, like Maggie the Frog.
Sure, if they're passing knowledge.
And is it Ina? At the
yes, from Ib, yes.
Who also seems to have learned the use of, in this case, blood magic, of using a drop of blood.
Just like Maggie, the frog.
Yeah. And what's to say that this is not part of becoming a Dosh Khaleen, that you learn a form of...
We just know too little for me to really...
Yes, we know. Anyway. I'm just saying that there are examples of people outside of those who are clearly born with the ability, like... the greenseers or those with...
Yes, I mean, Foros, for example, was educated, and then, of course, he points out, I mean, he was better than all the other students at it. So I think everyone is born with some sort of aptitude, but the way it expresses itself can be different from belief system to belief system. I mean, that's part of it. Yeah. The idea that, as we discussed in our previous video about how magic works and religion and so on, like, maybe there's no real gods and it's all belief structures that determine that, if you're raised in a Relorian tradition, your magic will express itself through fire and light and things like that. And if you're someone born in the north who has some connection to Children of the Forest, you might have green dreams, or if you're Targaryen, you might dragon dreams.
Yeah, but I mean, it's interesting that even on the subconscious level, because it's one thing to be in the Relorian belief system and learn to use the flame as a focus for looking into the future, because that's often a part of magic systems, that you need some form of focus, right, to look into the future, whether it's scrying in a water or a mirror or something, or here it's the flames. So that's used as a tool for accessing the way of seeing into the future. If you look at something like dreams, where Jojen talks about his dreams actually being green.
Yeah.
That's not a conscious training aspect. That is, and the dragon dreams, I mean, we call them that because they tend to show dragons.
Yes.
They tend to show something and express itself in images that involve dragons, and that's again not a learned thing. That seems to be more of a hereditary expression that you can't really decide on.
Yes, it's really interesting. I mean, I think the main point about prophecy, then, in relation to the nature of time, what does the existence of actual prophecy mean? Well, it means that the future, or at least certain events in the future, are determined already. They are decided. You can't look into the future if there's no future there. And this has implications for a lot of things, because for the first thing is it's starting to give you a sense of the sort of the metaphysics of a setting. Let's move on to Bloodraven and Bran and what Bloodraven says, because I think this is a key to understanding what George is deciding on in terms of how time actually works. What happens when Bran is beneath the weirwood and he's starting to learn from Bloodraven, who tells him, slip your skin as you would with summer, but send it into the tree roots and reach through the trees, the roots up to the trees above, and see what they see. Bran's first vision is of Ned cleaning ice in the Godswood. Pretty much a scene when we first see him in Catelyn's chapter.
Probably supposed to be.
Probably the same occasion, to be honest, but before she arrives, because he's supposed to lift his hand and say, who's there? Because Bran speaks like so in his mind, kind of Winterfell, and then suddenly Ned is acting as if he heard something. And then he comes out of it, and Bloodraven says a lot of interesting stuff, actually, about...
And obviously this has been a point that people now have discussed quite a bit, like, was Bran able to... Did Ned actually hear something? And obviously there are a lot of implications, so if Bran is actually able to make himself heard to Ned. But if that is the scene with Catelyn, he might as well have heard footsteps with her approach, for example.
Yeah, and
something like that.
Yeah, and she didn't hear him call out, who's there. He kind of went back, and then that's when she... I don't know,
But anyway, yes, Bloodraven...
says a lot of interesting things about what... I mean, but you saw shadows of days past. You were looking through the eyes of the heart tree in your Godswood. Time is different for a tree than for a man. Sun and soil and water, these are things that we would understand. It's not days and years and centuries. For men, time is a river. We are trapped in its flow, hurtling from past to present. Always in the same direction. Trees are different. The river doesn't move them. The river of time doesn't move them. They're always in place. And
they're like little nexuses, sort of, in...
islands in the flow of time, I guess.
In the flow of time. So you can certainly use them. I mean, it's clear that by being able to skin change and also dream, you can use the trees certainly to see back into the past, because for them, past, present, and future, according to Bloodraven, are one. They experience it all at the same time.
Yeah, the oak is the acorn is the oak, and obviously he says weirwood can live forever, basically, if undisturbed. It's all really interesting. And then Bran asks me, my father heard me, and Bloodraven says, well, no, he heard a rustling in the leaves, the wind through the leaves, and that's it. You can't change the past. I know I've tried. I've had people I loved and people I hated in the past. No word of mine ever reached them. You can't change anything. This is, I actually forgot about it. This is followed up eventually by Bran going back in and falling asleep and slipping into the tree again.
And now he starts going
even further
backwards
in time.
What he sees initially is a younger Ned, again, at the heart tree praying. And
saying some interesting stuff.
Yeah, saying some very interesting stuff. But at this point, Bran seems to realize, he tries to speak, and Ned lifts his head a little bit and looks at the weirwood frowning, but it seems to be just a coincidence, because Bran is thinking to himself that, I'm just the weirwood now. The weirwood can't speak. I can't speak. There's nothing for him to hear. I am just, a rustling of leaves or the wind or something like that. So he seems to recognize the truth of what Bloodraven told him in this instance. It seems to be... So I'm not sure that, yes, people do make a lot of the first instance, but for George to have the second one following so close after seems to be there to just show, Bran sort of gets this moment of hope, which then leads to Bloodraven offering some explanations of how time works for the weirwoods. And then when Bran goes back into experience, he seems to realize, it was a false hope. I can't really, the past is in the past and I can't do anything about it.
One other thing he says is, about time, as far as men goes, is men live their lives trapped in an eternal present between the mists of memory and the sea of shadow that is all we know of the days to come. Whereas again, and then he finishes with the trees, to them seasons pass in the flutter of a moth's wing, and past, present, future are one. Combined together, I mean, that statement in particular, we've discussed this, so kind of, he could mean in a sense that time doesn't really matter much to trees.
Everything's so slow, so it's all one thing. Really.
But combined with prophecy existing, combined with being able to see the future and see actual things.
And certainly you can see the past, because the past stays for the trees in a way. It's always there.
Yes. To me, I think George has revealed something of the sort of the metaphysics of the setting. And here we have to get into sort of some philosophical terms about the kinds of images of how time works. You have something called presentism, or the presentist view, which is the present is the only thing that exists. That sort of fits a little bit with what Bloodraven says about how men perceive it. We're always in the eternal present. The past is just memory for us, and the future is just the shadow of things that we know will come, but we don't know what they are. Then you have the sort of possibilism. Now this is the one that says the present exists and the past exists. The past is an actual thing that exists. We ourselves, because we are always in the present, we can't go into the past, we can't affect the past, we can't see the past exactly, but it actually exists. And the other name for it, I think, is the growing block universe idea, which is the idea that time is a block, but it's constantly growing from this edge of the present
so
that goes
everything
ahead.
That's happened
before
kind of sits there, but you can't access it necessarily.
And then there's one more, and I mean, because both of these, the interesting about these is they don't really leave any room for a future to exist that you can see via magic or science. They don't exist. The future doesn't exist until it's the past. There's something called the what is it called? I had the term. Eternalism. This is one that says past, present, and future are one. There's a block of time, all time, that exists, and it's set in stone. It is already there. The future is there, the past is there, the present is present. You get into all sorts of discussion about it, and there's people who have issues with it because they talk, well, it doesn't really give it a good explanation for the sort of the flow of time as we perceive it. I'm pretty sure this can all be explained in terms of how physical matter interacts with time and how our consciousness kind of perceives time. But it's not necessarily, it's not at sort of the universal truth of time isn't necessarily how we perceive it. It's something much more complicated. It gets really highfalutin, I have to say. It gets very quickly over people's heads. This is part of the reason I think a lot of people are kind of...
I prefer it when it goes over my head, because if it doesn't go over my head, it gives me a headache. It's everything to do with time.
So what are the implications? Let's talk about the implications of what... There's one big implication, I think. Well, there's two big implications for eternalism. For the view that in A Song of Ice and Fire, past, present, and future exist already, are determined, are set in stone. And that is... One is, people have a big sort of psychological reflex against this, because it means that everything is determined. You have a deterministic universe. Everything has already been decided. Everything that will happen has already been determined in some fashion. And what we do, we don't really have free will. We don't really have choice.
We think we do. I mean, we obviously have the illusion of it, that we're making choices. And
partly it comes out of ignorance. Like because we don't know the consequences, we don't know what the future is, the choices we make they feel like they're consequential, even if a fifth dimensional entity sitting outside of a universe looking at time as a whole can see already knows what's happened. And I mean, obviously, if you buy a religious views of things, of an omniscient God, well, technically speaking, an omniscient God means he knows everything that you've done and will do. So people kind of have a big problem with a deterministic universe, and they say, well, what's the point of reading about a story where people don't really have free will? They don't really have choice. I find it strange personally, because
we read historical fiction, and other things where we know what the ending is, and really, if you look at fiction as a whole, I mean, George has said that he knows the ending.
Yeah.
So even if he, talks about being a gardener rather than an architect, and he doesn't plan out the whole story, there are writers who plan out in much more detail. He does have, a roadmap of where he's going. So the idea that it's, anything could happen is obviously an illusion. There's sort of layers of illusions of where we think, everything is open-ended, or but there is a psychological appeal to the idea that things are open-ended. I mean, you see that with games and such as well. Yeah. People like the feeling that, in a story, with a role-playing game or something, that there is an open-ended story, that you have at least the feel that anything could happen and that your choices really matter. And then people complain when they see that, well, I did this and that, and it's all, pushing me in the same direction. I'm ending up at the same point.
That's a good example. I mean, just look at the Telltale game for Game of Thrones, where people were complaining about, the choices that you make. They're dramatic in the moment, but when you look at it, at the whole product, you realize, you're railroaded along certain paths and certain choices you make.
And you are railroaded in a book, ultimately. You don't want to, but certainly the author is deciding where you're going and how you're getting there. There is a possibility, I guess, that one could see A Song of Ice and Fire as a semi-determined future, if you imagine that it matches George's writing process, where he says, I've got the big stops along the way mapped out.
How I get to them.
So they're like maybe key events, sort of nexus events of the future are set in stone. Those are the ones that you can see. There are problems with that.
My problem with that is we see not all prophecy. We were discussing this walking, and we really started thinking, if you think about it, some of these prophecies and dreams, like look at Daron the Drunken's dream about a dragon dying at Ashford, and he tries to get away from Ashford. He runs off with Egg, which leads to Egg meeting Sir Duncan Vatall, who eventually becomes a Knight of Kingsguard and Lord Commander of Kingsguard, who eventually is the person who is apparently responsible for at least some of the survivors of Summerhall, presumably including the newly born Rhaegar Targaryen. You can imagine, you can also see, like, okay, all prophecy has to tie into these big, massive events, so they can seem inconsequential, but then the thing is we have some examples of, I think,
Maggie the Frog saying that Malara Heatherspoon is going to die, that she's not going to get married.
That her death is in the tent with her. Cersei murdering her is...
it's not an effect of that.
It's not. I mean, it reveals something about Cersei, but no one knows about it. It has no real effect on anything. She's still paranoid regardless about Tyrion and that aspect of the little brother. So it feels a little bit like there are prophecies, there are people seeing things that are not, in the grand scheme of things, don't really matter. Which then says, well, if that's the case, then this notion of nexuses that George...
Why would they hit on these... somehow this little piece of the future was decided and I just stumbled on it and it applied to you. Then it's more likely that everything is in fact decided. Then, of course, one question, sort of a counterpoint to that is, again, if we look at the weirwoods, other ways of seeing the future, I can see them being, the shadowy shapes of the future that it's hard to make out. But when you look at the past through the weirwoods, it's quite clear.
Yes.
So if past and present and future are all one for the weirwood, and the future is as set in stone as the past, why are you not able to see the future as clearly through the weirwood as you can see the past?
There's a really interesting aspect of all of this, which is the greenseer. I mean, what is a greenseer? Jojen tells Bran, 1 in 1,000 men may become a skin changer. 1 in 1,000 skin changers may be a greenseer, may have the dreams.
Yeah.
So basically, to be able to bond with these weirwoods, you need to be able to slip into the roots via skin changing, and you need that capacity to be able to of magic, or to see things that are beyond you, that are in the future and maybe in the past, but that somehow permits you to be able to access what the tree has seen in the past.
Yeah.
I just find it really interesting that it includes dreaming the future, and yet they're not able to see the future through the weirwoods.
Well, it's not strictly clear, actually, when the way Bloodraven phrases it. When Bran asks him how long his training is going to take, I haven't seen, he says, a month, a year, I haven't seen that yet. So he could mean that he's actually able to get some things, the direct visions, that he's able to sort of travel the river of time downwards as well through the weirwood, but that somehow perhaps it's supposed to be much more difficult to comprehend the future through the weirwood, because obviously they perceive things in a very different way. So it could be that it's just too difficult for men to understand. So it's not necessarily that he dreams it.
No, not necessarily.
Because Jojen's green dreams, it's a bit odd to see where Jojen fits in that he's not a skin changer, but he does have the moss green eyes. I mean, the greenseers have either the red albino, or red eyes, blood red eyes, or moss green eyes. So he seems to have skipped the skin changing and has just the dreams, which means he can't go into the trees, but he can dream.
Yeah.
But that may mean that he doesn't have the ability to do the vision straight through the trees, and that's something that Bloodraven has, and that Bran will learn.
Let's move on, I think, now to the question, and this is the big hot topic, it's the idea. I was looking, because I was trying to say, when did someone first have this notion about maybe there's time travel as a part of a story? As far as I can tell, looking at our forum, 2011, the publication of A Dance with Dragons, Bran briefly talking to Ned or trying to talk, and then Bloodraven said, well, you can't do it. And obviously, as always, people jump on things and say, aha, that's probably a thing. So let's look at the question of time travel. And I think it might be useful to look at time travel as George has written it, and also as George has read it in others that he's sort of remarked on in the past, because it might give some insights into what sort of ways he can see it working. Science fiction, of course, has been dealing with time travel since H.G. Wells, I guess. It's been something that it's a big topic in it, and
particularly in science fiction short stories. I mean, that tends to be a very fertile ground for it, but because it has a little bit of that,
puzzle,
Twilight Zone, Outer Limits kind of feel. That
and it works really well in the shorter fiction, because it's sort of time travel introduces a sort of a puzzle state where you can have a puzzle, like, how do I, from what happens when I go from time B to time A and I tweak something. So you think
Plus you don't have to deal with all of the fallout from it and have the whole cosmology sorted out if you'd written a short story.
Exactly. George himself has written a couple of stories that deal with time travel, and he's also wrote a TV series back in the 80s, which more or less relates to time travel. The first one is Under Siege. This is actually his fix-up of this historical fiction that he wrote for university.
That one's rather fascinating. It's Scandinavian history. The
Nordic history.
Yeah, well, true, but it's Swedish-Finnish anyway. We will call them Scandinavian for the purpose. But anyway, he wrote the Fortress, about the surrender of the Sveaborg Fästning fortress, and then he redid it as a science fiction. And basically the idea is that it's a really fucked up future after a nuclear
Yes, the Soviet Union and the US went to war, everything's messed up. You have these mutated dwarven people who have the ability to kind of send their consciousness into the past. I mean, they're basically kind of skin changing into people in the past. And the idea is they've got this theory that if they can just go back to these sort of nexus points, these key points in history, and change it, maybe they'll make it so that the Soviet Union never goes to war. And so you have this nameless protagonist who goes back to the head of a young colonel in the sort of forces at Sveaborg. And it looks like he's going to kill off somebody and cause this change. And like they figure it's their best chance. And he decides, you know what? The future is horrible. I kind of like it here. I'm going to convince him to surrender Sveaborg, basically creating what happens. And then I'm going to, you know, start taking over this guy and end up moving to the United States, become a journalist. He ends up being a great, you know, pundit and prognosticator who was often very accurate about what the future held. And then was always very surprised when he was wrong. And saying, you know, in particular, his writings were key in the election of the Republican nominees, Charles something Fremont.
Which is probably the change that he does ultimately instigate, and that is the one that...
Well, he causes changes, yes.
Yes.
I mean...
So it seems that where he, in fact, created what happened at the Nexus Point, or confirmed the event of the Nexus Point, the fortress was surrendered at an early time, basically.
It's baffling
it was
why,
baffling why they surrendered. They should have been able to hold up much longer. And then he becomes the explanation, sort of, why they surrender, in a sense, because he decides. And then he seems to somehow still affect things, but we don't know if the future that they're heading towards
any better or worse,
any better or worse, if there's still going to be this nuclear catastrophe. It doesn't seem to affect... I mean, his consciousness doesn't disappear. So it's not like he's managed to do something that somehow eradicated him in the future, and then...
There we start getting into various approaches people have to dealing with time travel, because you have... There's a couple of different approaches people have had to how, if time travel could happen, how would it work in relation to causality, that things progress in a certain way. Like, there's the whole paradox. Can you go back in time to kill your grandfather before you're conceived?
Or, you know, is it the... Back to the Future movies where he starts fading from the photograph because
he starts fading from
he's starting to mess up his parents' relationships.
So you have like that, and that was very inconsistent. Doesn't really make much sense. So, if he doesn't exist in the future, how can he have come from the future into the past? So you have one approach is this sort of I think this physicist called Novikov's self-consistency principle. Lots of people have been mentioning it all over the place all of a sudden, which is basically time travelers, if they exist, can go into the past, provided that what they do in the past does not disallow everything that happens after. So your grandfather talks about this drink he had with this guy who introduced him to his future wife, and it turns out that time traveler was his future grandson.
That works.
Hanging out with his father, his grandfather, making sure he met his own grandmother. That works. The other approach is you can go into the past, you can kill your grandfather before you're conceived, but you create a parallel universe, an alternate timeline. Your timeline still exists. Things are still ticking along just fine, but you are sort of an intruder into a new timeline in which you have changed things, and that will come out differently. But since you originate from another universe, another timeline,
you stay there, because even though you won't exist as you won't ever be created in that timeline, but you, the visitor, stay in that timeline.
In Unsound Variations, that's another story. There's a time traveler there who comes up with time travel and uses it to kind of have revenge on a bunch of guys who he feels
over a chess match.
All over a chess match that he lost, and he swears that it was impossible to win, and you people were unfair to me. And all these guys had bright futures ahead of them, and then things went wrong for all of them. And what it turns out is he developed a time machine and went to use it to have revenge. He would go into the future. Or he would find, so-and-so is successful starting this business, inventing this thing or whatever. I'm going to rewind to the past, and I'm going to invent the thing that they have. So-and-so has this big success getting a grant for something. I'm going to go into the past and make sure that the grant goes to someone else. And basically, he was constantly seeing what happened and went back and changed it. Yeah. So you've got this weird, again, a sort of a parallel universe thing where the guy is, there's somebody from a timeline sees what happens in his timelines, goes back to and essentially creates a new timeline to stop it, and then revises it over and over.
If you try and dissect that one, I think you're going to come up with all sorts of paradox problems. I think I don't think that one can really
it can't
work
really
out.
sustain.
It's a short story idea. It works. It's a great story. It's a lot of fun. But if you start trying to figure out how it's actually supposed to work, you will just get a headache.
Yeah, you'll come into sort of these causality
kind of like that
paradoxes.
1B5 episode that always gives me a terrible headache.
Then the series that he wrote, which was Doorways, he did a pilot for it. He had written some scripts for it as well. That's the idea of it. There are doorways that can lead people into alternate timelines, parallel universes in which certain things happen, like a super bacteria develops that eats oil and all oil-based goods. So there's no plastics, there's no oil anymore. What is that world like? There's one, I think he recalled that he was going to have one where they jumped and they ended up at Mount Rushmore, and the faces on Mount Rushmore are different. I don't quite recall the details. This is another one where basically has the approach that time, there's lots of different timelines, and in theory, someone can go and change things and create a new timeline, but the original timeline is still as it is. You have another completely different set of stories, and these are the ones that play with time travel as a deterministic universe where things are decided already. Time travelers can go back, but they're doing this consistency thing. They're creating the conditions that lead to their own future. Famously, I think Robert Heinlein is known for a couple of really notable ones, By His Bootstraps, and in particular, All You Zombies, which George, I think, has spoken very highly of. All You Zombies basically plays with the idea of somebody from the future who is basically both their own father and their own mother. Born in the past as an orphan who's abandoned, a hermaphrodite essentially, grows up female, meets this stranger, handsome stranger, has a child, later gets recruited to his time agency and sort of decides, I think I might enjoy life more as a man, goes back into the past to impregnate herself when she was still female, giving birth to herself. It's very consistent. The paradox here is like, how does that...
Was the child also moved back into the past then? Because otherwise they couldn't grow up.
I think yes, he takes the child and brings it back to kind of to fulfill this loop in time, and it's very consistent. But the paradox here is like,
where does it start?
Where does it start? It can't possibly have started naturally. Now, this is the thing where people talk about, we perceive time in a linear way because that's a limitation. If you believe that there's this sort of everything is set in stone, maybe time isn't really linear. Maybe things can happen. I think I've heard people on a very theoretical level talking about maybe the oddities in quantum physics, some of the weird things about the probabilities, how, things aren't determined until you observe them. Maybe some of these things happen because basically the future results are already affecting them on a quantum level. There's a whole thing about quantum. I mean, Einstein hated it. He said, God doesn't play dice with the universe. I
hate it because it gives me a headache.
Yeah, well, partly people say it works solely because you're looking at extremely small, the smallest possible scales, and the rules at the smallest possible scales of the universe don't necessarily match the rules at the sort of macro scale, the larger scale. Relativity and all this stuff is right. It's just, how do you connect? How can you make a unified theory that kind of connects everything together in a way that makes sense?
Conspiracy theory.
No. All You Zombies is particularly interesting because it was George actually praised. There was a film adaptation. It's really good actually, of Ethan Hawke, called Predestination. I think a couple of brothers in Australia directed it, wrote it. It's really faithful. It's really cool. They add like an additional storyline that fits into it, but and George praised it, pushed for it for the Hugo last year. I think this year as well, because they made it so that it was eligible because of the fact that it had such a limited release previously. It's really good, and it gives you this idea of how you can make time travel even in a deterministic, looping way, make sense and be fun. So the question is, which model is George using a model where time travel can happen, where someone can affect the past? Is it? There's all sorts of questions about that. Let's leave that for the next segment, I think.
Yeah.
Is Bloodraven actually correct that you can't talk to people, you can't change things? He says he's tried and it's never worked. Bran tries twice, once inadvertently, and the second time, like, he really decided, like, I'm going to try and do it, and it doesn't work. There's a possibility, of course, that Bloodraven is lying, I suppose, but he doesn't want Bran to affect things, so he's telling him you can't do it. Another possibility is it's a strength thing. He's never been strong enough, and Bran is more powerful than he is. I mean, we know that there's differing levels of strength for skin changers.
Yeah.
Presumably, dreamers have differing levels of strength. I mean, Foros thinks about the fact that he was better than anyone else at looking at the flame, so there may be that aspect to it. Another possibility that comes to mind, I mean, if he's not lying,
he might not have been at the right conditions. I mean, maybe there is a limit to what you can do, when you can do it. I mean, if we're talking a more deterministic view, where you can have this sort of closed loop, then yes, maybe there are predetermined points where you, and then at this point in the future, you went back into the past and did this thing that caused something to happen to happen the way it had already happened. Sort of this confirming events of the past. The problem in general, I think one also needs to look at sort of the story as a whole. The short stories that George have written that deal with time travel, that they do it as it's a central gimmick or element of those stories. The doorway thing would also be a sort of central driving thing, that there are alternate timelines, alternate universes.
Yeah, it's right from the start, and it's sort of central to the narrative. There are novels of time travel, from The Time Machine, Ken Grimwood's Replay. All of those take the premise right from the get-go. Time travel is the key concept of the story, and we're just going to explore it out and create a story.
Introducing the idea that, Bran could go back and change the past in the fifth novel seems alien
to me.
It doesn't. I could perhaps buy it in the idea that Bran learns that he always did something, that this was always his destiny to go back and set certain things in motion. That is easier to swallow because maybe it took longer for George to get to this point in Bran's training. Maybe he had hoped to have that as an earlier element in the books, and then we would see it. It's also, poetically speaking, it is obviously plays into the bittersweet factor that if these things happen at a late point where Bran learns that I'm the cause of things that have happened, and I always was. I think that personally, I don't believe at all that we will see Bran changing the past so that the future that has happened comes out different.
No, that's absolutely...
That is absolutely not happening. This is not... The story isn't going to get rewritten. That is off the table entirely.
I really think... I mean, if that was an idea that George had for the story...
It would have been earlier.
It would have been far earlier as an idea of, okay, how we can change our future, how do we do it? And it would be a driving force.
It would be
and it's not, so...
The idea that he learns late that he was responsible or was supposed to become responsible for elements of the story, I can see that fitting the tone of the novels.
Well, I mean, think of the things, I mean, the idea that maybe Bran from the future after the others are defeated realizes, looking back in the past, and he sees this pregnant direwolf, and he slips into her skin and makes her come south to be killed by a stag and give birth of her young in the snow and have them be found. And and set into motion Ned going south and dying, Rob dying, Catelyn dying, because it's supposed to happen.
It already happened.
That is I can see the bittersweet side, and it would feel like maybe 70% of the way to the story it's okay if George does this.
Because it's not really changing anything. It's all about how Bran's relationship to the events.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. Obviously, a lot of this came up. I mean, I talked about that in my review of the 5th episode, The Door. This came out as something to discuss because of the apparent action on the show that Bran, in the past, skin changes into young Willis and lets him see the future where he dies, and then somehow creates Hodor, which one could argue is necessary, because if Hodor wasn't the simple-minded giant stable boy, maybe he wouldn't be with Bran. Maybe he wouldn't have been able to take Bran to the Weirwood in the first place.
I mean, from what they've said, I'm not watching the show, but obviously I don't live in a cave, so I know the gist of what's happened. I saw the interviews where they say this hold the door thing is something that George has confirmed it. It's the idea that he's had since 1991 about Hodor's. So I mean, what it says is there is a future event that explains why young Hodor started saying Hodor and became Hodor.
Yes.
So we have an example here of
certain that something happened to allow young Hodor or young Walder in the books. He's Will is on the show. He's Walder in the books, for him to see his death and the circumstances of his death, and that damaged him in the past. That much is clear. George said that the circumstances and the context will be different.
Yes.
But it has been integral to the story since 1991.
That's actually a major thing.
The fact that he had it so long, and that that suggests that if, something is involving a time travel aspect of the mind, and I mean, he has done time travel of the mind before, because he did it in Under Siege. So he's used that idea, and we know he reuses concepts.
There's an alternative to all this of Bran from the future going back to create the past that leads to his future, and that goes back to Bloodraven. And I think, for me, it appeals more because it feels like it's an interesting note. It's something that fits
the character.
It fits the facts. And I say, if you read about Bloodraven in Duncan Egg, he was an unpopular figure. Generally speaking, who was very effective at what he did, keeping the Targaryens in power. If you read The World of Ice and Fire in particular, George revealed some of his future and explains why he ends up going to the Wall, because he murders a Blackfire claimant despite having promised him safety, and he did it because it was a pragmatic and very ruthless way of getting rid of a problem. And basically, Egg, once elected king, had no choice but to send him to the Wall.
And here you can start speculating about all sorts of scenarios where Bloodraven, for example, had already seen that he needed to be at the Wall. Or
he would see certain things about the future, being a greenseer.
And he would do what he could to confirm that future. Yeah,
and this could include even once he's in the Weirwood, once he's with the children, doing things like
sending the direwolf.
I mean, it's widely speculated that the cache of obsidian, of that broken horn, or someone very suspect that found at the Fist of the First Man, it was actually left by Bloodraven with the intention of knowing that it would be found later and it would have a role. Basically,
you could see him as having seeded points of the story along.
And maybe he knew about Hodor. Maybe he saw Hodor and he said, well, I gotta turn this kid into Hodor, and I'm going to go invade his dreams, and I'm going to force him to see his death, or I'm going to carry him off to the heart of winter and get him damaged on the spears of the others, and make him into Hodor. And Bran discovering this, I mean, it fits the character to be this ruthless in his. He is very much the ends justify the means. He does horrible things for ends that he feels are good. Bran discovering that his mentor has done these horrible things to his family has led to the death of his family and so on, just to get him up there. Maybe even, as some wants to speculate, has manipulated events to create Bran, that he had a role in driving Aerys mad and making Rhaegar and Lyanna meet. You can fall very much down a rabbit hole on this.
Yeah.
And obviously, there is still a little paradoxical, because basically future information is being used to create the future.
Yeah.
And but it feels like a lesser paradox, because it's more information than someone of the future going back.
True.
So
it's sort of an idea that you have to help prophecy along by. I mean, because we see that in Melisandre as well. She feels that she has to set things in motion and help prophecy along the way a little bit. And I suppose, one of the things she sees is, she thinks that Bloodraven is her, great enemy. She thinks that
this wooden face
is her enemy. Well, in a sense, she could be right if he has been creating all these circumstances of the current, the current war that's going to happen, and all the other aspects of it. So,
I find it very appealing. I admit. I think I would prefer.
It's even more tragic, I would say, that if Bran realizes that he has to do the things rather than learning that somebody did them. Unless the idea is that Bran is going to realize that now that's his role for future event, then he's going to have to
continue sometimes doing kind of nudging things along just to confirm the future. Now, obviously, there's always the aspect of people say, "Oh, why can't he decide? Well, the future's going to happen. I don't need to do anything. It's going to happen regardless."
Well, then that was what he was supposed to decide.
That's what he was supposed to decide. So, you definitely fall down a rabbit hole here. It can be very complex.
I think by now we need a pair of shovels to dig us out of the rabbit hole, but I don't know that we've managed to solve anything. I hope that we've given people something to think about. Perhaps, not immediately jumping to the idea that Bran can time travel and change the past, because there are other options. The idea of him creating a whole new future, I think that's entirely out of the question with the information that we have from the series and the prophecy and everything. But there's certainly a lot to think about when it comes to the nature of time in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Until next time?
Yeah, the next time it will
be your review of
Game of Thrones video, the review of episode 6, and then we'll see what we come up with for one of these A Song of Ice and Fire videos after that one.
Yeah, we'll see.